back to Countermeasures. I'm Rebecca Costa, and I'll be your host for another hour of unbiased, agenda-free news. As you already know, our goal on Countermeasures is to go deep. Each week, we invite an expert or a leader to talk about the challenges we face, and we ask them to offer a prescriptive, practical way out. And we're not just talking about the economy. We're concerned with growing problems in education, climate change, health, and energy, problems which have been around now for many generations. Today's experts see these problems differently, and they also advocate radically different ways to solve them. But there are two things on which they all agree. Time is short, and we need inspired leadership to dig ourselves out of the hole. Our guest on the program today is Mr. Steve Farber, acclaimed expert in something called extreme leadership. And in just a few minutes, we're going to find out what extreme leadership is and how to separate effective leaders from those who, as Farber puts it, could use a little work. But before Farber joins us in the studio, let's say hello to our chat czar, Meredith, who's going to tell you how to log in and submit your questions for our guest today. Good morning, Meredith.
Good morning, Rebecca. That's right. One of the most unique aspects of our show is the opportunity for interactivity. So while you're watching, if you have a question for Rebecca or for our guest, Steve Farber, you can go online and you can interact with us one of two ways. One, you can email us, and that's at emPOWERme.tv. The other way is to go on Twitter. You ask a question and type in the hashtag #CMWRC, Countermeasures with Rebecca Costa. And I'll be able to see the question right away, and potentially Rebecca will be able to ask it during the interview. So get on there, get on Twitter, email, and start interacting right now, because literally your question could be asked on air.
Thanks, Meredith. Well, we'll be checking back with you just a little later on. Well, this week, the Occupy Wall Street movement spread from downtown Manhattan to over 70 cities across the country, from Seattle, Dallas, and Tampa to Boise and Providence, Rhode Island. Citizens gathered on the state capitol steps to protest economic inequality and the influence wealthy corporations have had on public policy. Last Wednesday, over 20,000 protesters marched in New York City, and the numbers are expected to grow as organized labor and other groups join this ad hoc movement. Now, I happened to be in New York speaking when the protests began, so I decided to go right down to the front lines to find out what this movement was really about. And I want to take a moment to give you my first-hand take on the situation, because I know that many of you at home are shaking your heads and wondering what in the world is going on. In truth, the protesters are being criticized by the mainstream media for two things. Critics complain that the movement has too many agendas, talk show hosts in particular. And by the way, I'm talking about all of them, from Bill Maher to Bill O'Reilly, are critical of the fact that the protesters can't articulate a singular objective. So as a result, when reporters interview three protesters, one is protesting to end the Federal Reserve, the other person wants more government regulation to stop corporations from destroying the environment, and a third person is protesting for jobs. Well, the media doesn't like that because it feels unstructured and messy. So for the most part, they've been subtly implying that the movement will die because the protesters won't be able to agree on what they're really protesting about. And the second criticism I keep hearing is that the protesters have confused opposition with advocacy. They're against a lot of things, but they seem unclear about what to replace these things with. For example, it's fine to say that you want the Federal Reserve abolished, but how do you propose to do that? And what do you plan to replace it with? But I'd like to go on record as saying that all protests start out messy. The folks who gathered in Egypt's Tahrir Square, that was tough to get out. Tahrir Square didn't have a single agenda. Some were there because of unemployment, others because of government corruption, others because they wanted an education for their children or Mubarak out. This is how social change starts. It's messy. These protests begin with general malcontent. The solutions to the problems are very complicated, so those get worked out much later down the road. I admit that I am one of the few commentators that is perfectly comfortable with multiple agendas and messy. I'm also comfortable with the fact that they don't all agree on what the solution should be. What's more, I'll go on the record right here and now and tell you What we're witnessing today is just the tip of the iceberg. Mark my words, we're going to see many more people identify with this group in the coming weeks. It's not just organized labor that plans to throw in with them. A few days ago, I spoke to the president of the National Organization for Women, who publicly endorsed the Occupy Wall Street movement. She reminded me that the average net worth of a single white female in the United States today is around $42,500. Whereas the net worth of a single African-American female sits around $100. Latina females fare only slightly better with a net worth of $125. $42,500 versus $125. When we're talking about economic discrepancies, we're not only talking about the difference between the salaries of top executives and factory workers, we're also talking about inequality along racial lines. As everyone from NOW to Amnesty International, the ACLU, Greenpeace, and other organizations jump on board, I predict we are going to see one of the biggest, most profound social movements the world has experienced. Which leads me to this week's bad policy. Our bad policy this week is the administration's proposed surtax on citizens earning more than $1 million a year, also known as the Buffett tax after billionaire Warren Buffett, who complained that he paid a lower rate than his secretary. Now, I have to believe Buffett isn't receiving quite as many dinner invitations after making that remark and having a new tax named after him. According to Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid, a 5% tax increase on the wealthy will generate around $450 billion, enough to cover the new jobs bill proposed by the White House. But according to House Budget Committee Chair Paul Ryan, the tax doesn't do anything for the nation's historic deficit and would in fact do harm to the economy. Conservatives want to focus exclusively on spending reductions. So, who's right? Well, we need to cut spending, and we also need tax reform in order to address the reason that individuals in 70 cities are standing on the steps of the state capitol, stock exchanges, bridges, and town squares, quickly amassing the largest lobbyist group that Washington has ever seen. Watch out, oil, farm, and pharmaceutical lobbyists. Here comes the mother of all lobby groups, Americans who are paying the price of corporate influence on government policy. The Republicans will argue that when you tax the rich, they have to tighten their belts, and that means that they'll be hiring even fewer people. Their argument is that higher taxes act as a disincentive for growth. The wealthy are already paying plenty of taxes, so according to the GOP leaders, the issue is mismanagement. Adding even more money to the pot won't fix the problem if we can't stop spending. On the other hand, the Democrats will argue that unfair is unfair. Everyone has to kick in to get out of debt, and the wealthiest Americans have not contributed their fair share. Most liberals feel that a small surtax on the wealthy won't do anything to curtail their enthusiasm for making more money. In truth, both are right. The government needs to be better stewards of the public's money, and the wealthiest members of the society cannot be permitted to shoulder less burden than the poorest. But a 5% surcharge on folks earning over $1 million a year isn't the answer. Because this is just another stopgap measure that doesn't address the real systemic problem. Even Grover Norquist, the man behind the No New Taxes pledge, agrees that the real solution to inequality is to overhaul the tax code and make it very, very simple. On that score, both Democrats and Republicans completely agree. When you make the tax code simple, you get rid of the thousands of loopholes which make it legal for a company like General Electric to pay no taxes. So instead of taking shortcuts like a 5% tax hike on the wealthy, we need our leaders to stop acting like professional wrestlers who everyone knows are just acting like they want to kill each other in the ring and then later all go out for a beer together. And instead, get together and really solve the problem. Get together in a room and see what we can agree on, and tax reform is something that we can agree on. The Buffett tax is just another short-term mitigation, which is going to lead to another showdown between the Democrats and Republicans, And I know that I speak for the vast majority of Americans when I say we are sick and tired of it. If both parties agree that the tax code is the real problem, then I call upon them to get in the same room and get to work. Get busy fixing the root of the problem, and you'll be surprised at how fast the side effects disappear. But as far as I'm concerned, the Buffett tax is another Band-Aid on a patient who needs the ER. And it's not just me that's fed up with the name-calling, gridlock, and short-term mentality in our nation's capital. Take a close look. The Occupy Wall Street movement isn't about liberals or conservatives. It's about regular, everyday Americans who are taking to the streets because nothing is getting done by either party. And that's our bad policy of the week. Next up, Mr. Steve Farber, an expert on extreme leadership. He's going to be telling us exactly what kind of leadership we need in Washington, D.C. to get out of this mess. That story next.
If you haven't picked up a copy of The Watchman's Rattle yet, may I make a suggestion? First, read what the experts have to say about the book. Go to www.RebeccaCosta.com, where you'll find reviews written by game changers such as Sir Richard Branson, Trudy Styler, Tina Brown, Donald Trump, Senator Bill Bradley, and two-time Pulitzer Prize winner Dr. Edward O. Wilson. The Watchman's Rattle was recently named the top science book of 2010 by the American Library Journal. Over 50 reviews and articles from experts at the New York Times, Inc. magazine, CNN's Larry King Live, the Huffington Post, and the San Jose Mercury News are also available on the website. If you haven't picked up your copy of The Watchman's Rattle, a page-turner that spells out why governments, experts, and leaders have become gridlocked and can no longer solve our most dangerous problems, don't wait. Read what the critics have to say. Order your first edition copy today. Available at bookstores everywhere and Amazon.com.
With me in the studio today is the author of Radical Leap, a book that I really recommend everybody go out and read right away if you want to learn anything about leadership. Steve Farber is an expert at extreme leadership, something that I think we can all agree we need a little bit of, not only in Washington, D.C., but maybe in corporate America as well. And he has a who's who list of corporate clients as well. So welcome very much. I'm excited to have you.
Thanks. I'm excited to be here.
I'm tripping all over myself.
Don't hurt yourself.
All right. Well, my first question to you is, what's extreme leadership, and how's that different from just regular leadership?
Extreme leadership, in one way, extreme leadership is just my way of saying the real deal, real leadership. It's a bit of a problematic phrase because it's actually redundant. Or it should be redundant. There shouldn't be any reason to modify the word leadership with the word extreme. Because if we're really leading, and not just calling ourselves leaders, as many people nowadays are wont to do, we're already involved in something extreme, because real leadership by its nature is an extreme act. It's about transformation in some way or another. It's taking nothing, turning into something, taking something good, turning into something extraordinary. It's really about, when you boil it all down, it's about changing our piece of the world for the better. So really what distinguishes the extreme leader from any other leader is the extreme leader steps up with the intent not just to get great results, which is obviously important, but with the intent of significantly shifting the nature of things where he or she lives and changing their piece of the world for the better.
Okay, but if you just went out on the street and you had like 35 people and you said, "Are you a leader?" I got to believe 34 out of 35 would say, yes, I am.
Yeah, depending
I am a leader. But you pose that that's not true.
I pose that for most of those people who are posing that they're leaders are posing that they're leaders.
Posing.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do we tell the real leaders from the posing leaders? Because I know that you make the point in your book, and also I've heard you speak many times, that it's not the title on your business card, it's not how many people you have reporting to you, not how much a year you make, it's not even if your boss comes and empowers you. That doesn't make a leader.
That's right.
So how do we tell what's a leader and what's not a leader? Because I think there's a lot of people that want to be able to make that determination quickly.
Yeah, well, you're exactly right. It's got nothing to do with the position or title that you hold. It's got nothing to do with where you sit on the org chart if you're in the context of a company. It's got everything to do with first of all, your willingness to step up, and then the courage to really take a stand to change things for the better. Now, typically, when we think about that, if you just look at that terminology, change things for the better, change the world, we tend to think, no surprise, globally, because we think of world as capital W world. And if we can, in our own ways, change, as we used to call it when we were kids, the whole wide world for the better, that's great. But this whole wide world that we live in is made up of a lot of smaller W worlds, right? So this is about stepping up with the intent of changing the world of, you define what world is. The world of your company, the world of your clients, the world of your community, the world of your neighborhood, the world of your family, one person in your family for that matter. So the real leader, otherwise known as extreme leader, starts with that intent and has the courage to follow through with definitive action to try to make that happen.
So they have some idea of a greater good that they're driving for. And that greater good could be the planet, or it could be the greater good of their family.
Right.
So this is a micro greater good or a macro greater good.
Yes, exactly. And I think one of the things that gets us caught up in seeing our own leadership potential is that there's this myth that it goes back to what we were talking about a minute ago, this myth that leadership is the sole domain of people in positions of power. And while it's certainly important that the more power a person wields, we would hope that they would live up to that same kind of ideal that goes beyond the ego and really serves the common good, but that doesn't rule the rest of us out. Right? So our willingness to say what can change in a business context in my team, for example, regardless of what anybody else in this company in positions of power is or is not doing, what can I do here to make this a better place to work? Same goes for our communities and for our families. And if I'm running a corporation, for this corporation.
Well, I see that we're getting a lot of traffic up on the chat room, so I want to go to Meredith and see what she's got. Meredith, how you doing in the chat room?
Doing great. We have a question for Steve from Modern. Who are examples, in your opinion, of prominent people that you would categorize as extreme leaders?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Obviously the person who's been in the news lately, of course, is Steve Jobs with his passing. So I can point to Steve Jobs with a bit of a qualifier, okay? And this is a qualifier that I would put on anybody that's in the public eye. The most inspiring leaders that I've met are people that you've never heard of. They're the people who are famous within their organizations for doing incredible things. When you get to somebody like a Steve Jobs, I never personally worked for him, with him, and I never met him. So my view of Steve Jobs is what the rest of us see. It's the filter through which we look at him. All right. But if you look at it from that point of view, and you may get a different picture from people that actually worked with him side by side.
I actually worked with Steve Jobs during the early years of Apple. When they were just forming the company, and I happened to be in Silicon Valley at the time. We sort of lost touch as his company went off to be what it is today.
Yeah.
And they had a better selection of vendors.
Right. Well, his speech to the Stanford grads in 2005 has been making the rounds on the news lately, and it's a speech that I've actually been quoting for quite some time because he's talking about how he made it through the difficult times when he got fired from Apple and he was in exile essentially. He said, and this is a quote, he said, "The only thing that kept me going was that I loved what I did. The only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work, and the only way to do great work is to love what you do."
So that's that greater good that you listen for in an extreme leader,
yes,
is that right?
And it's the right word. Love is not a word that we're accustomed to saying in the same sentence as business, or even in the same sentence as leadership. But if you really look at it critically, it's love. It's love of, it could be love of the cause, love of the principles that we stand for, love of the technology, love of the impact that we can have on the world, love of the people that we work with, love of the customers that we serve. That's what gives us the juice to step up. So I think Steve Jobs was unabashed in his use of the word love, his love of Apple, his love of the technology, his love of the work, right?
But isn't that rather rare? Because your list of clients reads like a who's who. It's Walt Disney, Wells Fargo, Marriott Corporation. I mean, it's a really impressive list. I'm having a hard time sitting here right now imagining myself walking into the corporate boardroom and talking about love.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that word comes up much in corporate America.
It doesn't. It doesn't. But you know what? I've been on my soapbox about this for a number of years now, and at first I was really nervous about using the language. Because of
it's
that,
squishy. It's kind of squishy language.
It seems like it is, but there's really nothing squishy about it, right? This whole idea that the heart is somehow some kind of California touchy-feely hoo-ha crap.
Now we have to tell the audience we are from California,
I can say
so
that. Right.
yeah, so we can say that,
yes,
right?
Okay. I take my California license to say that. But at the same time, in the same breath, again, I'm a business guy, so let's look at it from a business context. In one breath, we say that we want our customers to love us, right? That's Apple's. If I know it's a little bit of an oversimplification, but their competitive advantage is that the Apple users love Apple products, right? We can't in one breath say we want our customers to love us, to love our products and services, and on the other breath say, well, love is touchy-feely stuff. It's not. It's just damn good business as far as I'm concerned. But there's no way that we're ever going to create an environment that produces the quality of product or service that people are going to love without striving to create that internally.
Well, it always feels like that love thing in business is a one-way street. We want our customers to love us, love our products, and love to give us their money to buy our products and services. But do we as a corporation really love our customers? I mean, how many times have you heard people on the line say, gosh, this would be a great job if we just didn't have any customers?
Exactly.
I mean, the love doesn't seem to go the other way.
No, you're right on the money. I mean, it's very easy to print the banners and the little buttons that say we love our customers and tell all your employees
comes
to wear
number
them.
one.
Right.
Yeah.
What else are we going to say? Right? The customer is stupid. We wish you'd get out of our way so we can get our jobs done around here. Nobody's going to say that.
Need those buttons to have a lie detector on them or something. Yeah.
Right, exactly. But the extreme leader, the real leader, somebody who gets that it's not a marketing ploy. It's not a nice thing to say. It's the kind of environment that we should strive to create.
So does an extreme leader then try to open the valve so that there's a mutual reciprocity? We want our customers to love us, but first we have to love them. We have to step up.
And it goes even deeper than that.
Now you've written this book, Radical Leap. And again, I want to show the book because I think it's an important book for anybody who's leading teams or even leading your family. I think it's a really terrific book. I just want to talk about this for a moment. What does Radical Leap have to do with extreme leadership?
Well, leap is
love.
Well, no surprise. Leap starts with L. Which, as you would probably guess by now, stands for love. So LEAP is it's the operating system or framework for the extreme leader. The extreme leader cultivates love, generates energy, inspires audacity, and ultimately provides proof. Right? So love, if you just leave love where it is, right, as kind of a motivator, it does, sounds a little touchy-feely until you start to tie it all the way through into how does it affect the results that we get? That's the proof part of it.
Tie it for us quickly here. I want to try to understand that stream. You mentioned off 4 different things.
So it's not just doing what you love. It's doing what you love in the service of people, customers,
that's that greater
employees,
good.
Right? Who love what you do. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. If you just do what you love and leave it there, it's obviously not enough. I mean, we could argue that, criminals are doing what they love too. But I don't think they would qualify for.
But there's some extreme leaders that are criminals.
Yeah, there are. Not the kind that we would willingly follow necessarily.
No, not necessarily.
So it's do what you love in the service of people. That's kind of the moral context, the greater good, the ethical context. But not just to serve them, again, for our own self-gratification and make us feel good for being that kind of person, but to serve them in a way that they love what we do for them. Do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. If that's your intent, if that's why you step up, that generates energy. And we have a lot of synonyms that for energy. We call it engagement. We can call it enthusiasm.
Charisma.
It can. I think energy is charismatic, but they don't necessarily go together. I mean, there are people that have that certain level of charisma, outgoingness, extroversion. They can stand up on a table and deliver a great speech, but they really don't generate any energy because everybody knows they're full of it. Right?
Now, when you talk about energy, one of the examples you give is that you're a leader that's generating energy if you walk into a room and everyone's posture and energy starts being drained.
Yeah, so the question is,
when you walk out of the room, they're all happy and they start talking.
Right.
That's one of your litmus tests.
It's a great litmus test to ask yourself, do I generate more energy when I walk into a room when I walk out of it? right? I mean, because
Yeah, but you know, even if you run that test on yourself, how many people are going to be honest about it?
Yeah.
How many of those people out on the street that think they're leaders but are posers are going to say, no, I generate a lot of energy? Of course, you ask everybody else that's around them, and they say, nah.
Right. That's why it's
rather not have that guy on
yeah,
my team.
That's why it's just a litmus test, because the people that need to be answering that question are the ones in the room.
Yeah, that's
exactly.
right. That's right.
And, you know, if you start to pay attention to it, though, I mean, it begins to bring about that level of self-awareness. I mean, you can tell. If you're really paying attention, trying to be honest with yourself, you can tell that if you walk into the room and you notice that you're kind of sucking the life out of the place and you see people kind of shrivel up and wither and die, that's not a good sign, right? Now, having said that, it's not the same thing as saying that that energy equals you know, an outgoing personality like yours, for example. I mean, you generate energy when you walk in a room. It's part of your personality.
Can
Very
I use you
outgoing.
as my litmus test?
Yeah, certainly. But the thing is that I've known some very quiet, soft-spoken people in my work that generate tremendous energy because of their deep level of love and passion and commitment for what they're trying to do and the people that they work with, and they express it in their own way. Right?
Absolutely.
But it's not enough to generate energy. Employee engagement has become a popular goal for all the right reasons. The problem that I have with it is that it becomes an end in and of itself. It's not just enough to engage people, and there's been, you know, research that ties engagement with productivity, et cetera.
Right.
But I think our real opportunity is to begin to ask the question, what can we do? What can we really do with the energy that we create? That's the audacity piece, which I define as a bold and blatant disregard for normal constraints in order to change, you know, our piece of the world for the better. So the love is the impetus, generates energy, and then you get audacious with what you can do with the energy, and you prove it obviously through a couple of things. One is your results, right? And the other is through the consistency between word and action. So it comes back to that question, how do you separate the posers from the extreme leaders? Well, you just do a pretty simple measure. What are they saying and what are they doing?
Right, so there has to be some core philosophy that generates energy, that produces audacity, because now you've got the philosophy and the energy. You're empowered, effectively.
Right.
That produces audacity, and then from there now you're moving toward results, concrete.
Yeah, exactly.
And consistent results, by the way, because when you've got a core philosophy and you've got endless energy, it tends to build on itself, and you're in an upward spiral. So I'm going to put you to the test here. Are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, I'm going to put you through to the test. We got these people on Occupy Wall Street, which I talked about earlier on.
Right.
Okay, they're coming together, lots of different agendas, lots of energy, not necessarily channeled or directed.
Right.
So what would you say to them about leadership? What should they do to have extreme leadership? Because we talked about love. I think they have love. I think they have love for the country.
Yeah, I think that's...
And I think what they're doing is patriotic. And we talked about this a while back, about the fact that people always label protesters, and it doesn't matter what they're protesting about. Could be nuclear energy, could be the Iraq War. They always label them as being not patriotic. And yet one of the great gifts in this country is the right to express yourself.
Yes.
I think being engaged is patriotic. I don't have to agree with what people are engaged in, but I don't want them labeled as unpatriotic. And on that point, you and I agree.
Yeah.
So they've come together. They're growing in larger and larger numbers. My brother called me from Boise. Probably the nicest town in America, I got to tell you. Easiest going people. People just trying to raise their families, go to work, you know, show up at the high school football game. It's almost a throwback to the 50s when you go to Boise, Idaho. And 300 people standing in the rain on the state capitol building, right, saying that there's too much of an embedded relationship between corporations and government, and that the government's no longer really serving the interest of the people.
Right.
What do you say to these people that are gathering, strangers who don't know each other? What advice could you give them about leadership? Well,
I think that we're going to see leadership emerge in that, as or hopefully we will, as in any movement. I mean, the same thing, the same kind of dynamic happened with the early, Tea Party protests.
That's right.
Which evolved into, a viable political force. Right. So right now, the so-called Occupy Wall Street, I don't even know that you could call it a movement yet, right? It's a lot of people that are really pissed off. That's what it is.
It's an expression.
It's an expression, and for a lot of good reasons. But as you said in your opening comments, there's really not a lot of coherence yet, other than people want business to be ethical. Well, I don't think anybody's going to argue with that point. I don't know that I don't think anybody's going to stand up and say, we think that business could be, more biased and more crooked than they are today. That's really the source of our problem. There's too much ethical behavior in business, right? So we agree that business needs to be more ethical. We can also agree that a lot of individuals need to be more ethical, right?
That's a fact.
So I think over time, and maybe it's going to be a very short period of time, the clear message, will emerge, and there will be some people that will step forward that are able to articulate what the group stands for, maybe more than one.
So are
person.
they at the love stage? Are they at the energy stage? Or are they at the audacity stage?
I think they're still at the pissed off stage. And that would be if we put pissed, it would be the radical pleep. That doesn't sound very good. But sometimes sometimes getting pissed off and getting angry about something is the impetus that makes you stand up.
Right.
And I do agree with you that if you really trace it back, the reason that people are angry is because of a love of what we stand for as a country and a frustration that we're not living up to what we all
So
believe
isn't
in.
that the love stage? Couldn't I argue that the love is the love of my country and the love of the promise of democracy and the promise of our leaders? Maybe that's the love that's generating the energy that's attracting people, more and more people. I mean, this has grown from Manhattan to 70 cities in the course of 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And as I said in my opening remarks, the mother of all lobbying groups.
Right.
I mean, forget worrying about these lobbyists in Washington, D.C. You mobilize unhappy citizens in the United States, you got the largest lobbying group anyone's ever even conceived of.
Okay, so I think we're in violent agreement on that.
So we got the love and we got the energy.
But hold on a second, because the question you asked me is what kind of advice would I give them?
Yes.
I don't know, but I suspect that if you go out there and just walk around and talk to people and you ask them why you're here, the answer you're going to hear from most people is because I'm angry, not because I'm in love, right?
Okay.
So I think the first step is, and a lot of it's just a natural progression of things. It'll calm down a little bit, but then to be able to refocus it to say, all right, where does that anger come from? So it begins. It's kind of a self-reflective thing. I think for every individual that's out there, protesting and coming together, is to really kind of refocus. What is this all about?
So you'd rather see signs, that say I love my country.
Yeah, because the thing is, if I'm coming from a place of being angry, then what I'm trying to do is tear something down. Now, sometimes you need to tear things down to build something new, but I find, and this is true on a macro level, it's true on a micro level, I find that it's more productive to really begin to think about what can we build together because we share that common, in this case, love of country. I think that's going to be more likely to lead us to a solution. It's definitely not something that we're seeing modeled by our political leaders nowadays.
That's right.
Because so much of what's happening it's not do what you love in the service of people who love what you do. It's I'm doing what I love, one could argue, in service of myself because I want to stay in office, I want to get reelected, I've got an agenda that I'm standing up for, and whether or not we're going to come up with solutions that really serve all of us.
That's a good point. I hate to interrupt you, but we've got a chat room that's going nuts.
Yeah, okay.
And I knew it would as soon as you got here. So Meredith, what do you have in the chat room?
Got a question from Racket. In your opinion, is it overly optimistic to believe that we are seeing a groundswell of new leadership that can transform things?
Is it overly optimistic? No, I don't think so.
Is there
at
any
all.
such thing as overly optimistic?
I don't believe there is. Listen, am I a bit of an idealist? Yeah, I'll cop to that. But I'm not naive. I'm not naive. I know that I'm setting the bar pretty high with this, but I also really deeply believe that we're in the midst of creating our next generation of leaders. The kids that are, literally kids that are in school now, that are in elementary, middle, and high school, we have an opportunity now, out of the ashes of this horrible situation that we have in education, to really begin to cultivate our next generation of leaders that could take us to, that I believe will take us to an entirely different
That's right. Now, you have a story about David Pinter in education,
Yeah.
which is a feet on the street real story about
Yeah.
extreme leadership.
Yeah.
Maybe you could talk about that.
Yeah,
for just a
sure.
minute.
Just to give a little context for it, I wrote, is the Radical Leap Re-Energized is a new edition of the Radical Leap and the Radical Edge put together into one book. Those are my first 2 books. And the reason I put them together is because of the response that people have had to LEAP, to Love, Energy, Audacity, and Proof. Not just in the business world, but in the world of education. And I never intended it. This is one of these emergent opportunities.
Isn't that wonderful, though?
It's very cool.
I mean, yeah,
it's
people
very
pick
cool.
things up. I found that true about my book, too. Suddenly the Green Movement, it won the top award as a green book.
Right.
And I was shocked because it
wasn't on your radar screen.
It wasn't on my
Yeah.
radar screen, but it's one of the great rewards of writing nonfiction, I think.
So I've started to, right away I started to hear from teachers, principals, administrators who wrote to tell me that they got the book somehow. Somebody gave it to them, picked it up in a bookstore, and it really made a difference in the way they led in their schools. And the first principal that I ever heard from was David Pinter, who at the time was principal of Finnegan Elementary School in Jacksonville, Florida. He sent me this long email that said that love, energy, audacity, and proof, and the way that he's used it to lead in his school, to create the relationship with his faculties, with the kids, with the community, has completely helped them to transform not only the feel of the school, but the results of the school. So I called him, and I said, well, tell me more about this. And he harangued me for, 45 minutes about this is what the world of education needs. So what he's done, now again, keep in mind, this is a guy, and he's not the only one. There are others. There are many others like him that say to themselves, this is my school. The world of education is screwed up. Systemically things need to change. Policy-wise things need to change. We're all operating under severe budget limitations that's only getting worse. We're being forced to teach to the test, and all this, just a whole litany of things to complain about. And what he's saying, and others like him are saying, is, yes, it's screwed up out there, but that doesn't mean that I can't make a difference right here where I live. So the question he begins to ask is, and it's one that I posed earlier, what can I start doing in my school, regardless of what is or is not happening out there, to change this place for the better, to change these kids' lives for the better? And love doesn't require any signing off on a law. You just do it.
Well, he had love for his school, and his greater vision is, what can I do for my school?
Exactly.
And fortunately, he intersected with your book and started out with the love of his school, generated energy, and allowed that energy to become contagious to his teachers.
Let's not forget the proof part. Test scores went up. The school improved on every quantifiable measure that everybody else is being measured on. And he stayed there for several years, and now he's at Fort Caroline Elementary, and he's doing the same thing all over again.
Oh, can't we get him into Washington, D.C.?
Well, here's the
Michelle Rhee, who I know, they kicked her out as soon as she
but-
started getting results. Maybe we need to get another person in
But
there.
here's the thing. I think, Rebecca, that's a natural place for us to go. Can we get somebody like that into that position of authority, which would be a great thing? But I think the trap that we all fall into is that's where we go, is we say, well, that's what those leaders need to be like. True. But what I got to start asking myself is,
why doesn't every principal and every teacher
No, if I'm a principal, what I have to start asking myself is, what can I do to emulate that where I live right now?
Right.
And if enough people do that, it's that groundswell. It's
It'll
gonna create a
percolate
change.
from the ground
And
up.
I've met lots of these people. I mean, David is brilliant. He's actually become a wonderful friend over the years. And I will tell you that there are a lot more people like him out there. They just need a little bit of guidance, and they need somebody to come along and say, that impulse that you have, that love. See, this is what blew my mind. We just had a conversation about how controversial love is in the context of business.
Yeah.
It's even more controversial in the context of education, which blows my mind. Educators are really reluctant to use that word love. Now, from the outside looking in, I mean, I'm not an educator, I guess of adults I am, but I don't really know much about school. I mean, I went to school, I had kids that went to school, that's about it, right? But when I started to hear that there's this pushback about using love when you talk about how you teach kids, I just didn't get it. I still don't get it. If you don't love kids, what the hell are you doing in education?
That's that two-way street that I was talking about.
Yeah.
Some teachers say, well, of course I love my students. Of course I love children. That's why I became a teacher.
Right.
But my question back to them is always, do your students love you?
Yeah,
That's
right.
that two-way street.
Absolutely.
That's that customers. Do your
Yeah.
customers love you? We worry so much about we love them, but do they love you back? You know, when kids love a teacher, they learn better.
That's right. I mean,
we
and
all
let's-
remember our favorite teacher.
And let's not forget,
face it.
let's not forget that there is such a thing as tough love also. So to say that, what some people misinterpret this, say, okay, well, if I'm a teacher or if I'm a boss at work or a team leader, whatever it is, and I'm trying to create an environment where everybody loves me, then I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that I don't anger people and that I don't, and that's actually not what happens. If I'm a teacher and I really love my kids, I'm going to push them harder. I'm not going to take it when they come up with excuse after excuse for not doing their work or whatever it is.
Well, that
because
goes back
I love
to what
them and
you
I believe
said.
them.
If you love the vision, the greater good, you really start from a place of you're working for the greater good.
Yes.
People will see that
Yes.
that you have love for them
Right.
and their greater interest at heart. I'm going to go back to the chat room for just a moment because I know it's just burning up there. I get everybody waving at me going, you got to take more questions from the chat room.
Okay.
But I knew I was going to get so involved in talking to you, I wouldn't do that.
Fire
Meredith,
away.
how are we doing in the chat room?
Lots of questions. One from No Limit. If leadership is so personal, why do most people seem to look for it externally and become disappointed when their leaders fail?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think it's actually because it is so personal. Because leadership affects us personally. That's why it's an important. That's why there are over 50
But we
billion books
always
written on the subject.
blame our leaders. We
do.
blame our leaders. We don't blame ourselves.
We do, and I think, frankly, there's a place for that. I mean, I think we always need to vote our conscience, no matter what side of the political spectrum we're on. We need to do that in an informed sort of a way. At work, we don't have that kind of. We don't have that kind of choice. Most workplaces are not a democracy where you vote for, who your boss is going to be. But we still have a choice that we can make, which, again, is to say, is there something I can do to influence the way that my leader or leaders do their job? Mm-hmm. That's always a legitimate question to ask. And am I willing to take that risk in order to bring that to their attention? But the other side of that coin at the same time is there something I can learn from either their great example or their terrible example? So if it's a great example, I want to emulate it. If it's a terrible example, obviously I want to do the opposite of it to inform the way that I lead, even if it doesn't say, again, leader on my business card. Nobody
That's
reports to me. I'm on the front line working with customers. Is there something that I can do differently? And, hopefully those people will change. Maybe they'll change because of the example that I set and the results that I get in my piece of this company or this world.
Well, on that note, I knew this wasn't going to be enough time today, and I hope that
it was a good start.
I hope that you'll come back very soon because this is a time when we really do need leadership to help us out of our troubles. Again, I really thank you for being
pleasure,
with us
Rebecca.
today.
Thank you.
Next up, our Insight of the Week. But before we get to the Insight of the Week, I just want to check in with Meredith in the chat room and find out if you have any final comments, Meredith, about what's been going on, what the conversation's been like.
There's been a lot of action today, and I just want to thank a few people out there. We got Me Babe, thanks for tweeting, No Limit, Modern, Racket, Loop. Thanks so much for joining the conversation. I know we didn't get to some people, but you can still tweet in, you can still email, and we'll get to your questions. And again, come back on next time, which is 9 a.m. Pacific, and get on Twitter. Use our hashtag, which is #CMWRC, and write your questions in. I'm sitting in front of a computer. I'll see you immediately, and I'll be able to flag Rebecca and let her know that there are some questions going on here. You can also email at countermeasureslive at emPOWERme.tv. So join the conversation. We look forward to hearing more from you next time.
And before we say goodbye to you today, there's just one more thing. This week's Insight comes courtesy of the founder of the X Prize Foundation, Peter Diamandis. I had an opportunity to hear Peter recently when we were both speaking at the Nantucket Project, and I was taken aback by the unusual model of philanthropy they're using to stimulate innovation and prevail over the world's most daunting challenges. For those of you not familiar with the X Prize, they're the group which offered a $10 million prize for the first non-governmental organization that successfully launched a reusable manned spacecraft into suborbital flight. The prize was won in 2004 by Burt Rutan, who subsequently licensed the technology to Sir Richard Branson, who later formed Virgin Galactic. It's estimated that teams all around the world invested well over $100 million trying to win the $10 million prize money. But this isn't the first time a substantial prize has stimulated progress. Today's X Prize is, to a large extent, inspired by the $25,000 Orteig Prize, which actually inspired American hero Charles Lindbergh to make the first nonstop flight between New York and Paris in 1927. The prize money, which was a large amount during that time, attracted many experienced contenders. In fact, Lindbergh was neither the best known or the most experienced of those who are pursuing the lucrative bounty. Based on the success of the Orteig Prize in the 20s, Peter Diamandis convinced entrepreneurs Anousheh and Amir Asari to put up the first $10 million prize for a private manned space flight. And from here, prizes have expanded to include teams that successfully reverse the aging of mice, a prize for sequencing 100 human genomes in less than 10 days, and more recently, the Oil Cleanup X Challenge Prize, initiated by philanthropist Wendy Schmidt, which will reward technology which is most successful at cleaning up surface oil resulting from ocean platform tanker and other leaks. Qualcomm has offered a $10 million prize for a mobile device that will diagnose patients better than physicians, and Bill and Melinda Gates are stepping forward with a prize for the early detection of tuberculosis. Virtually any innovation which will benefit humanity is up for a lucrative X Prize. In this way, the X Prize Foundation is incentivizing teams of scientists all around the world to strive for the greater good. But the best news of all is that these teams will invest more than 10 times the prize money to solve one of humankind's most challenging problems. From this standpoint, the X Prize represents an entirely new model for philanthropy based on a similar model used by venture capitalists. When problems are complex, it makes no sense to bet on only one horse, as our government recently discovered with their investment in Solyndra. It makes infinitely more sense to bet on many solutions at the same time and then reward the solution which succeeds. And in this way, the X Prize Foundation has not only incentivized teams everywhere to work for the public good, but they have found a way to turn high failure rates into a successful venture. Wow. Talk about putting a new spin on a jobs program. And that's our insight for the week. Well, we've come to the end of our hour together, and I want to mention that if you missed the full interview with extreme leadership expert Steve Farber, all of our episodes are available on emPOWERme.tv as well as YouTube. We made it really easy to watch Countermeasures anytime, anywhere, at your leisure. And please continue to send me your comments and questions at my website, www.RebeccaCosta.com. Frankly, I get some of my best ideas from viewers, so keep those comments coming. And don't forget to tune in next week, right here on emPOWERme.tv at 9 a.m. Pacific, when we will have a surprise guest joining me in the studio. My producer tells me we're keeping it a secret right on up to the last minute because of security concerns, but I think it's really because they like to keep me in suspense. So tune in next week for another hour of Straight Talk Television and to find out who our surprise guest is. I'm Rebecca Costa, and I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day to join me on Countermeasures.